Thank you for being here tonight. It's good to be in a school. It's always tough to be in a school talking to parents and teachers because we look at the data and we know what schools are going through. And so when we hear the superintendent talking about these sad stories, those are the stories we're hearing all the time, and we're hearing them all over Oklahoma. As Amy mentioned, the Oklahoma Policy Institute, it's a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank. So we look at the information and we share it. I'm sorry Senator Don felt like he couldn't be here tonight. We are often on the same page with him, but he may not want to talk to us about education funding because this is something that we're very passionate about.
He's working real hard and she's real proud of him.
Well, I hope he is. I hope he's really thinking about what we can do for education funding. You know, as policy analysts, we look at the public policies and we also look at what matters to individuals in Oklahoma. And right now, we're thinking a lot about the parents and the teachers and the administrators who are dealing with the testing that's starting. And we know that there's a lot of pressure with that. And then there's all of the pressure of worrying about the classroom size and the lack of teachers and how are we going to pay for things. And it's a lot of pressure. And we also look at how other people are feeling in Oklahoma, like the healthcare workers who are thinking about how we had 7 rural hospitals go bankrupt in the last 5 years. And we see Medicaid reimbursement funds on the chopping block. And we see all of these people with disabilities, children with disabilities on these years-long waiting list, waiting to get in-home health care. And we see all of these staff cuts in DHS and all of these children waiting to get homes. This is a problem that is all over Oklahoma. And I share the superintendent's concern that our legislators don't seem to be getting that all of these things are connected to funding. I hear people say things like, you can't just throw money at it. Well, we're not in any danger of throwing money at anything. We've had some of the worst cuts in the nation to education funding, and I don't have to tell you all that, you know that. But we're suffering in every other area of Oklahoma services as well. They say, well, education gets the biggest piece of the pie, and it does, and it should, but the pie keeps getting smaller. And what we have to impress upon those legislators is that we need that pie to grow a little bit. We're not saying, let's have the highest tax rates in the nation. We're saying, let's adequately fund Oklahoma schools and Oklahoma healthcare and Oklahoma public safety so that we can take care of our own. Oklahoma's in a lot of dangerous situations right now. We have our criminal justice system is in a very dangerous state with over 100% inmate populations and about 60% staffing. That's a really dangerous situation when you have officers often working double shifts and they aren't really in control anymore. And these are the things that are going on all over the place. So I'm worried about you all, I'm worried about your kids, I'm worried about our teachers, and I have to worry about all of these other things as well. And all of our troubles are connected, they're connected to funding also because when we have to worry about funding, it drains our energy, it drains our focus. We can't think about what is the best way to teach schools, what are they doing at Union that we can replicate all over Oklahoma? How do we get people excited about the best ways to teach when they're having to worry about, do we have enough printer paper? Or do I as a teacher have enough income to be able to feed my kids? When people are stressed out, they have to make some really tough decisions. With $611 million shortfall, our legislators have to make some tough decisions right now. And there's one decision that really shouldn't be that tough, and that's, as Amy mentioned, the tax cut that they passed last year that wasn't supposed to trigger, but it is triggering because of the way the bill was written. And I'll let Jean Perry, our policy director, tell you all a little bit more about that. But they have a lot of other options as well to fill that budget hole. And the big thing that we all need to realize is that they are not taking those options. Right now, they are not looking at good ways to fill that. They're looking at stopgap measures like the rainy day fund and whatnot. And we need a whole mental shift in our legislature about how we take care of our own in Oklahoma. We have less federal funding for some things in Oklahoma because our GDP has increased. Because Oklahoma has more revenue. I grew up in Oklahoma. This is my home. I love this state. And I believe that we can be a great state with good schools and good health care and safe communities. But you have to invest to have nice things. And that's where I would like to see Oklahoma go. I want to trade off and let Jean take the lead and tell you all a little bit more about some of what the superintendent was saying about the state of education in Oklahoma.
All right, so I wanted to
talk a little bit about how we got in this position. It was mentioned that we've had 24% cuts to state aid for schools after inflation per student. And it's important to remember that that happened before oil prices fell. That happened before this big budget hole that we're dealing with this year came into play. It happened during a time when Oklahoma's economy was actually doing pretty well. We had lower unemployment than most other places. We had a booming oil and gas industry that was helping the state's economy. And yet we were still making that 24% cut, which was actually the largest cut percentage-wise to education in the whole country. And so, what that tells you is that the budget hole we have this year, legislators might want to say that it's because of the oil and gas industry, and other things that we might have done have nothing to do with it, and it's out of our hands. This is just the hand of cards we were dealt. But we've made these cuts during good times, and now we're in the bad times. And so I think what that says is our tax system is not bringing in enough revenue in good years and bad to fund the things that we need. And that's for a few reasons. We've cut taxes repeatedly since the mid-2000s for tax cuts that altogether have amounted to about $1 billion in lost income tax revenue every single year. We've allowed lots of tax breaks to grow year after year. And when we get a bad year and they come and say, well, schools are going to have to get a cut, and public safety is going to have to get a cut, and everyone else is going to have to get a cut, they don't seem to come around to say, and these tax breaks that are going to business interests or various other interests, many of which do some good in a lot of different ways, but still don't have any oversight. They don't have any way to say, if we're cutting schools, then maybe we can't afford to give so much to the quality jobs incentives, or maybe we can't afford to give so much to the energy industry for horizontal drilling. That hasn't happened. And what we are saying this year, especially when we're in such a serious budget crisis, is legislators need to address these continuing revenue sources. They need to say, stop the tax cut, we don't need it, it shouldn't be a priority when we're falling so far behind in so many other priorities. We're saying do something about tax breaks and tax credits that, a lot of them just haven't had the oversight, and we don't even know how much they're going to cost until somebody comes in and claims them. We don't know who has them, and they can grow unchecked unless legislators do something about that. Do something that will bring in continuing revenue. Unfortunately, that's not the conversation that's being had in the Capitol right now. We've heard that the House and the Senate and Governor Fallon, they're debating this year's budget, and basically the debate is over how big are the cuts going to be. Every state agency, including education, is going to take cuts, and how big are they going to be, and how much are we going to reduce them by doing some one-time measures like getting money out of the rainy day fund, or going after some revolving funds that might be filled up with fees. And the problem with that is every single dollar that you take that's one time, that's not a continuing source of revenue, just means you're adding to next year's budget shortfall, because that money's not going to be there next year. So that is one thing we're trying to stress, and really encouraging Oklahomans to speak out, and in particular speak out about the tax cut, because it's absurd that we're cutting taxes right now, and it's absurd how it's happened. They passed the tax cut last year, but last year they knew they couldn't afford it because they had a tough budget last year. So they said, okay, we're going to put in a trigger, and the tax cut's only going to happen if revenues are estimated to be higher than they were in 2014. And back in December, the group that estimates revenues got together and said, okay, the estimate is higher, the tax cut is triggered. That was right before gas prices fell. So in February, when we know that revenues are actually going down, the tax cut's still triggered, and they're not going to do anything about it because the law just based it on that December estimate. We've been comparing it to deciding you're going to have a picnic tomorrow and deciding you're going to choose whether to do that based on last night's weather forecast. And it might be storming outside this morning, it might be hailing and there's tornado warnings, but we're going anyway because we decided based on last night's weather forecast. It doesn't make any sense. So in the materials, if you picked them up at the front, there's some other information about that and a web address where you can go to get a form to contact your legislators. We also encourage, definitely call your legislators and tell them that you recognize that these are choices that they're making. It's not out of their hands. These are the choices that we're making. There's also another item in the packet that talks about some other revenue options, and I don't need to get into the weeds of all those, but the basic idea that we're trying to get across is there are ways we can do sensible things to actually have more revenue and not just look for one-time money or look for who's going to get cut this year.